Welcome to Realizing Resilience, a podcast from the Connecticut Women's Consortium. We're not behavioral health professionals, but we're your gateway to real conversations with the experts. Each episode, we'll delve into the vast landscape of mental health, from personal stories to expert insights. Together, we'll bridge the gap between clinical expertise and personal experiences, connecting with diverse voices and perspectives. Join us for insightful conversations that demystify the world of mental health.
Jonah Francis is an expert in senior care and helping families living in and with dementia. Through his two companies, Pansy Home Care Service and A Better Way, Jonah provides guided aging, trained professionals to help with hands-on care, and licensed therapists to help families navigate the emotional side of aging and the changes in family dynamics. As a board member of the ALZ Association and the vice chairman of the Home Care Association, Jonah's mission is to improve how we care for people living with dementia and how we support their families living in it. Welcome back to Realizing Resilience. My name is Alana.
And I'm Marisa.
And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Jonah Francis. So thank you for joining us today, Jonah.
Oh, I appreciate you guys for having me.
First and foremost, could you talk a little bit about what a therapist's role is in helping families navigate caring for a loved one with dementia? And can you talk about how your work supports therapists in that?
Yeah, sure. So, to me, at least what I've learned from my therapists are, the role of a therapist is kind of like a coach for your mind, if you will, right? So in terms of supporting someone that is living with dementia, a therapist's job is more so guiding, encouraging, and providing them with the tools that they're going to need to continue to achieve success. When we're thinking about the demographic, the population that our therapists are starting to care for, those that are family caregivers, that number is just continuing to grow. Over 34 million Americans are identifying as family caregivers, right? Or as a caregiver or caring for someone that's at least 50 years of age or older. And their experience is a real experience that therapists need to understand so that they can support them as best as possible. And their experience is this. By the numbers, at least, right? 70% of family caregivers experience burnout or clinical signs of depression. About 22% of them are also experiencing financial tolls where, they're either strapped for cash or they're worried about where their money is coming from and the implications that, continuing to the burdens of caregiving is having on their job, right? So as a therapist, trying to learn that and understand that is important. But dementia is where things change. I like to describe dementia as brain failure. And in Connecticut alone, people that are living with Alzheimer's, between 2020 and 2025, we're going from about 80,000 people that were diagnosed to 90,000 people, and that number will continue to increase as time goes on, right? So within a very small window of time, we see the diagnosed population that are continuing to increase. So it's important that therapists understand, yes, the aging journey overall, and the support role that people are fulfilling, but more nuancedly, what's going on with this dementia population. Right, we have to make sure we understand.
That rate is pretty crazy. Do you think it's environmental reasons or because of awareness that more people are getting diagnosed?
I'd probably be one to lean on saying that it's more so due to awareness and more people are being diagnosed. Interesting stats, which I think might lead into a different question that you guys have. African Americans are 2 times more likely to be diagnosed for dementia than our Caucasian counterparts. So, of course, the more that we are starting to learn about this diagnosis, the more time, energy, effort, and resources that are being invested from companies like the Alzheimer's Association, the more that we're able to start unfolding things and treating the diagnosis a lot earlier. It used to be like taboo, not something that people wanted to speak of, not something that people wanted to be diagnosed for. Right, where now, if people are being diagnosed a lot earlier, they're seeking out diagnosis. I believe the statistic was it used to be less than like 2 out of 10 people wanted to know whether or not they were diagnosed, whereas now that statistic has jumped to like 6 out of 10 people would want to know, so they would seek an early diagnosis.
Also, if you think about it too, people are living longer than they ever have. So if you're living longer, your risk for being diagnosed with anything increases. I used to work at an assisted living home in high school, so I experienced all different ways there are to be elderly. Mm-hmm. We even had a dementia unit where residents could have a more like one-on-one experience. So it was definitely an interesting thing to be a part of.
So I love the fact that you used to work at an assisted living community, because you're 100% right. You see the full gamut. But your point earlier was so correct, right? Life expectancy overall, just as normal as humans continue to maneuver through our journey of human beings, right? Life expectancy has increased, right? A few years ago, I think it went from like 70, 78 now is to like 80 is the average life expectancy for a human being. And the number one cause or the number one sign of dementia is age, right? Our chances continue to increase as we continue to age. Once we pass 65 and over, is a pretty significant increase. But as we continue to age, that percentage chance of us being diagnosed or developing dementia continues to increase as well. So that was sharp observation.
I've been around elderly people most of my life, not just in that job, but in my personal life as well. I grew up with all 4 of my grandparents, and 2 of them lived with us. And I saw, firsthand my mother be a primary caregiver for her parents and the toll that took on her. So do you have any advice, not only for the unpaid family caregiver, but also for the professionals, hearing these stories in relation to compassion fatigue?
I mean, that is such a real situation that a bunch of people go through, because let's face it, a lot of people don't have the financial latitude to be able to hire or to place someone in an assisted living. I mean, that's very expensive. Even like what we do from our other company, Pansy Home Care, we train professionals to take care of people that are living with dementia, to work with people that are living with dementia. But again, that's not the norm. Less than half of Americans are retiring with $100,000 in their account for retirement, moving forward with their life. That's not the average person's reality, right? So to answer your question, I believe the answer is twofold. Number one, if you're already within the thick of things that you're providing support, you gotta take a step back, and you guys will probably know what that answer is, right? Self-care. Right? Sounds like cliche, but I mean, it's the truth, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of the significant other that you're caring for. So you have to take that step back, take care of yourself. While you are doing that, that's what leads me to my second part of your question here, because while you take that step back, now you have to start to develop a plan, develop a strategy. And that strategy to me looks like, what is your goals, right? What is your capacity to give? And last but not least, who's coming along for the ride, right? And to break that down a little bit more, what I mean by that is number one, you have to set your own goals, because if everyone needs purpose in order to continue to live a good quality of life, that means for you too, caregiver, right? So once you have that purpose, once you define what that looks like, now you got to say, all right, what is my capacity, right? I got to fulfill this part of my livelihood, but I also need to understand, what am I really capable of giving, so that I don't continue to burn myself out every single time, right? Every couple of weeks for some people is like when they get burnt out, and then it goes to every couple of days, and then it goes to every couple of hours. And then guess who feels the wrath of that? The person you're trying to help, right? So it's counterintuitive. So you figure out what's that capacity, what that looks like for you. And I like to say it's like, if you ever created a budget for yourself, it's much along the same thing, but in terms of your own personal fulfillment, right? 100% of your budget, 100% of who you are goes towards, goes at the top. And then everything that you like to do, you want to do, that fulfills you in life starts to go there. And then you start to assign a percentage of who that is and what that looks like on a weekly or daily basis for yourself. That's how you find your capacity. Right. And then once you find your capacity, you're like, now you start to see the gaps of the actual care that you're able to provide versus what's kind of missing. And now you can start to go, all right, who can I get to come along for this ride? What are those family, friends, caregivers, neighbors, professional caregivers, therapists that can help me to continue to build a good habit, quality of life, care habit and routines, so that we can make sure that the person that I want to care for, that deserves everything from me, right? When I'm able to give it, that's within my capacity, within my boundaries, that we're hitting on what they need to continue to survive.
I think that's awesome and super practical advice, because like you were saying about self-care, it does sound cliche, but I think that's because people just say self-care and then they don't say anything else. And it just makes you think of like taking a bath or something, or going to the gym. But actually having a practical solution of almost like laying out a budget for yourself and figuring out where your gaps are and how to fill them seems like a really good way to think about that.
But I wanted to also hit you guys with this because, again, financially paying for support is not the reality for a majority of Americans, right? But you still need that time to be able to take that step back. So when you're in that self-care, you're seeking for an opportunity to give you the self-care so you can start to work on these things, right? One thing that you could start to look for, again, we're talking about for caregivers here, is you can start to look for grant opportunities. And again, like an association like the Alzheimer's Association, they do give one-time grant funding for people to find respite care. Respite care is more temporary, right? And so does the NCAAA, the North Central Area Agency on Aging. There's a bunch of different area agencies on aging, but they also provide grant funding opportunities for you to be able to get some money so that you can pay for respite care. And again, you want to make sure that you have a plan for when you're going into that respite, because respite is temporary, right? You need a long-term plan so that you can continue to win the days and overcome objections on a regular basis.
I feel like the work you're doing is so important because there are so many systemic issues, and having an organization and a person in a position like yours to help people navigate is really necessary, because there are things available to people struggling, but they're not always so easy to find. Like even my grandparents, who had good health insurance and were white and middle class, had issues finding care for my grandfather. So obviously there are major changes that need to be made for accessibility for everyone. So if you had almost like a wish list of things you could see improved systemically, what do you think you would change? What are you seeing?
Well, if we're talking more systemically, of course, I got to go back to the reality that African Americans are facing, because I shared earlier that they're twice as likely to be diagnosed, right? And yet they're less likely to seek diagnosis. Those are some pretty high numbers there. But not only that, they're also twice as likely than their Caucasian counterparts. And I'm saying they as if I'm not Black myself, but we're also twice as likely as our Caucasian counterparts to experience discrimination while seeking support. But not only that, right? There are advances that are coming in, like the lecanemab, a drug that's been FDA approved, and also CMS has approved it as well. So insurances can start to cover that. And what that does is actually within the early stages of someone being diagnosed with dementia, it actually prolongs that stage for a much longer period of time. The problem, though, is systemically, the people that are a part of those case studies are not Black, right? Are not Asian, or not, Latina, right? It's mostly based on a specific demographic. And that might be because of, historical traumas and whatnot. But nonetheless, right? So systemically, like Black people of different races also needs to be a part of some of these testings and case studies so that we can be represented in the solution. Because the solution that is made for a white middle class American might not be the same solution that needs to be in that medication for someone that immigrated from Asia, or an African American that's living here in the United States as well. So if we're talking systemically, there's a bunch of things that we have to fix, but we have to fix access and opportunity to that access as well.
There definitely needs to be more promotion of acceptance, not only from the person who is diagnosed and their family, but also from society. It seems like people don't want to talk about it because then they'll catch it. Like they can't talk about this because it's contagious.
That definitely used to be the thing in the past, for sure. And again, people didn't want to acknowledge the fact that they may have experienced it. But what that led to was stereotypes. One of the projects that we're working on is the correlation between dementia and mental health diagnosis, because we see a lot of people living with dementia having mental health experiences. Like one of the things that we'll talk about during the training is sygnosias or agnosias, right? You have your anosognosia, and then your visual agnosia, and then capgras. Like these are all like mental health diagnosis or experiences that we're finding people living with dementia are experiencing as well. So yes, in the past, for sure, there's definitely that stigma, and it led to people saying things that might not be the experience that someone living with dementia is actually experiencing, and putting a lot more stigmas and different stereotypes onto the experience. or the individual, calling them crazy, saying they need to be locked away in insane asylums. I'm Jamaican, so one of the things that was always said about people that were starting to experience some like cognitive deficits was they need to be sent to Bellevue. That was like the Jamaican way of saying that they were crazy, right? That was like an insane asylum that for some reason, I don't know where it comes from, but that's legit what it was. So we're talking about like here in their American experience, and of course in the UK, they have like so much experiences catered towards dementia. But now when you start to talk about third world countries, right, the experiences is completely not the same. So, how do we get everything right up here in America so that we can start to help out? Because, that's what we do as Americans. We help everybody.
Dementia is like multiple taboos and things we don't want to talk about at the same time because it's aging, mental health, and inequity. And I just think it's fascinating because obviously there's inequity to access and cultural perceptions of care. There's just so many barriers in the conversation. So I think your work is super admirable, and it really does seem like we're making a lot of strides.
Yeah, I love how you defined all of that. And quite frankly, I've never pieced it together that way before, but it's so right. You definitely have something. Can't wait to hear the podcast so I can take that and start to look that up a little bit. Yeah, no, that's why I came here with some of those stats today as well. So I do sit on the board of directors for the Alzheimer's Association here in Connecticut. So the stats I'm the stats man. Like I get a bunch of statistics, and those are the stats that usually are catches my eyes. Of course, again, because I am also Black, but the inequities that people that are Black are facing with dementia. And again, we talked about the fact that we're twice as likely to be diagnosed, right, than a Caucasian counterpart. But we also don't get diagnosed more than any other race. So, what's going on there? How many? So our percentage rates are that much higher, anyways. But how many of us are living with these experiences? How many family members don't understand what dementia is? Right, and are thinking that their loved one is just going through the experience where they find themselves feeling helpless, right? They don't even know how to start to try and care for themselves because they don't even know what's going on with their loved one or their significant other, right? So there's a lot of work to be done. And again, I really love the way you encapsulated those three features, those three experiences about what dementia is and the conversation about dementia, which again, sure, I've thought about one-on-one, but not intertwining all three of them at the same time. That was good.
I know that you've mentioned some of the things you'll be covering in your training, helping families living with dementia win the day and overcome objections, which is on February 22nd and coming up sooner than I would like to admit. But overall, what are you hoping participants will walk away with after this training?
Sure. So I hope that they're going to walk away with understanding the dementia experience a little bit better, not just from the person that's living with dementia and how the brain what the brain changes are doing and effects. There will be a little bit about also the correlation between some of these mental health diagnoses and the experience of people that are living with dementia. But again, you need to know what your families, what those individuals that are providing that care are going through, so you can help them a lot better. So there'll be a lot of that in there as well in terms of resources. But lastly, they're definitely going to walk away with a bunch of different case studies that we've put together, both from our home care organization and our mental health organization. So it should be some interesting things that they're going to take away with them as well. So that's what we're kind of hoping for without kind of giving too much. Yeah, and again, that's why it's so passionate to me. There's an entire approach for working with someone living with dementia. A lot of times when you hear family members talk or even professionals talk, we're talking about doing for as opposed to the concept of doing with, right? And if any of the therapists can walk away from these conversations and these trainings with being able to identify what are some of those key phraseologies that their family members are using, that they can go, all right, we need to try to work on a shift of their mindset. Because again, my philosophy is winning the days. My philosophy is stacking wins. And the more you're able to stack wins and the more that they're able to teach that to their clients as well, right, the better their mindset is going to be to go into the next day or go into the next hour or go into the next minute when they're caring for someone living with dementia. And I just want to make it very kind of black and white here. People that are living with dementia also have other diagnoses that they're living with, right? So that's why it's such a different experience than anything else. They still might have cancer. They still might, suffer from a broken hip, right? And are trying to, recover from these things. But now their brain is failing. The way that I also like to have it for people to visualize is if you've ever seen a tooth decay, that's kind of what's happening with your brain. Your brain is also decaying. That's why I like to call it brain failure, right? The plaques in your brain, they start to develop beta amyloid plaques, which are proteins that develop that blocks, messaging being delivered from one thing to the other. Your neurons start to get tangled. And if they get tangled, that means that they're eventually gonna die, and that starts to cut off parts of your brain, and so things are no longer able to be functional. And the difference between this versus any other diagnosis is it's progressive. That means that if that person lives throughout their entire journey living with dementia, the dementia itself is going to kill them, right? So that's why it's so important that our therapist not only understands what's going on, but even maybe understands the type of dementia that family member is living in. We like to call it, right? So if they understand what it's living in, they understand what part of that family member's brain might be deteriorating and what's the causes of that's going to happen. So that's also what we're hoping to deliver. But I really just want to make it as simple, as black and white as possible. That's why this training is so important. That's why as a therapist, it's so important that you understand it, because, families are miserable. And we shared that experience, not to take too much more of the time, but we shared the experience of, their financial burdens, the burdens of their time, and then depression, right? But now I run a support group for men only. And when I asked the men of my support group, I said, you guys do have to start taking care of yourself. Well, what was their response? We don't got time to take care of ourselves. All right, so when will you start taking care of yourselves? When my wife dies. But that's the reality that people are facing. And when you hear something like that, of course, that's dark. It breaks your heart. But that might be too late. Neglecting your own personal health and livelihood and purpose in life, and waiting. The journey someone that's diagnosed to potential death can be anywhere from 8 to 20 plus years, right? So that's a long time of not taking care of yourself, not having time to care for yourself. So now by the time that your significant other is no more, if you don't pass away first, right, you might now be in a position where you can't recover from whatever other ailments might have been discovered now along the way, that maybe if was treated before could have helped you out, right? You might be burnt out to the point where therapy that could have helped once a week now may be needed 5 days out of the week. You know what I'm saying? So it's very important that we understand and our therapists understand what that experience is, because that's what, for my therapist, she knows me, and she spent a lot of time knowing me. And now our conversations are that one time out of actually biweekly, right? And it's more effective because she also understands my experience. And that's the only thing I'm hoping for with any of this stuff that I'm bringing into.
All right, so I feel like that takes us pretty much to the end.
Yeah, you listing out what to expect really grabs my attention, and it's awesome just how much information participants are going to be walking away with. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Links will be in the description to learn more about Jonah and his work with Pansy Home Care Service in a better way, and to keep up with us at the Connecticut Women's Consortium. We'll also link the registration for his upcoming training on February 22nd, helping families with dementia win the day and overcome objections. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.